Wargaming tactics, let's talk about null deployment. Now, if you learn anything else from this vlog, never go to the gaming club with your paycheck in your pocket. Maybe you know how this story goes. I had just gotten paid, just cashed my check, was running a little bit late. Rather than stopping home, I said, look, I'm just going to go straight to the gaming club. And as it would be, that night, a friend of mine had his entire Tyranid army for sale. Massive, massive Tyranid army. Big bugs, small bugs, bags and bags and bags of bits, conversions, dice, a gaming case, codex, tape measure, templates, literally everything. And it was a very reasonable price. And I faced a very, very interesting choice in that moment. Do the right thing and take that money, what it was earmarked for, and fix my car, literally the whole muffler and everything like south of the engine just held up by patchwork and wires and just an absolute disaster underneath there. Fix all that and try to get another year out of the car, or buy a Warhammer 40K army. Well, I bought the 40K army. The car finally gave up the ghost about 3 or 4 months later, so I made the right call on that. But suddenly I found myself with literally a ready-to-go Tyranid army. I had never played Tyranids before in Warhammer 40,000, never played Space Bugs, had no idea what I was doing. And at the time, the meta in Warhammer 40K, as it does now, favors shooting armies. And certainly Tyranids could put down some firepower. But the challenge I was facing was this massive horde of small bugs and big bugs and hive tyrants and really a fantastic army moving across the table, running across the table, eating tons and tons of shots everywhere. But by the time I hit my opponent's lines, I didn't have critical model mass. Warhammer 40,000 is essentially, it's a you go, I go system. You go, do your stuff. I wait. I then go do my stuff, and you wait. And there's a couple of interrupts here and there. But being a dice-based you go, I go system, model loss is a big deal. And there's certain exploits that you can use against your opponent to do that. So I'm finally crashing into my opponent's lines, and I just don't have the volume of D6s to do enough damage to effectively win the mission. And there were a couple of other holes at the time in the Tyranid Codex. So I'm playing this fantastic army, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. I really suddenly enjoyed playing Tyranids. But I had to figure out, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Got to look for something else. And this is where I understood the massive limitations of the Warhammer 40K rule set at the time, and continued limitations have to change the idea of deployment. And since then, giving it a term, null deployment, as in no deployment, I've been able to port this over to other wargaming systems. So I frame null deployment as another tool in your wargaming toolkit. Look at your army and see if this is something you can utilize based on the mission or against certain army builds. So there is this idea most of the time in most wargaming missions where you set up in your deployment zone, and it might be a table corner, it might be the table edge. Your opponent sets up in their deployment zone, and you kind of approach each other. Now, it's a forward, straight-on approach. Yes, I could move to the left and outflank. I could pull everything over to the right and do refused flank. But that starting zone being in one area really tends to favor and push you moving in one direction with a little bit less mobility. You know where I'm starting. You know where I'm going to come in from. You know where I'm going to advance from. And you could speed bump. You can do other tactics. And we've explored some of those tactics in the Wargaming playlist here on the channel. Null deployment says, I'm not going to start on that area and just move forward. I'm going to look for multiple entry points. I'm going to hit you from every single side. Now, I'm jumping back in time here, looking at this Tyranid army and how it played first with null deployment. And I say this, even though the rules are ancient history and outdated, a framework a framework to understand and look at units, look at the rules based on the rule set you're playing, not just Warhammer 40,000, to look and see null deployment. And then we'll look at Battletech. We'll kind of give a up-to-date or a more recent one utilizing. So this idea that my opponent is set up, they see an army that's going to run across the table, they're going to castle up and just blast me off the table. I had null deployment. The first element of null deployment is you have a unit or a group of units that are very, very resilient and very, very powerful. The type of units that make your opponent a little bit scared. 2 Hive Tyrants with Hive Guard running across the table with some units of Gaunts, they're pretty scary. The way you beat them, so those Hive Tyrants and that Guard unit, I would put down in my deployment zone, and I'm running straight towards my opponent. Straight towards my opponent. To defeat them, the easiest and most efficient thing with dice mechanics is just castle up, sit in place, and roll lots and lots and lots of dice. That encourages your opponent to block up, to bunch up, to defend themselves. So the first element of the null deployment list, ironically being no deployment, actually does deploy in the traditional manner. But it doesn't sit there. It goes right towards your opponent. If it's a close combat unit, cavalry, it's going to try and charge in. If it's a shooting-based unit, it's still going to be advancing as it shoots. It wants to encourage your opponent to castle up, stay in place, leverage dice. The second element of your army is going to look to see if they can enter from other table edges. Is there something in the rules? Now, at the time, Warhammer 40K had this thing called Outflank, where you could take Gene Stealers, and rather than enter in on your table edge, they would randomly enter on either the left or the right side table edge, the short table edge, as opposed to the long edge on a traditional wargaming table. I would flood the table with Gene Stealers outflanking left and right side. So now I have this powerful wedge of Hive Tyrants, think like giant Godzilla space bugs, moving forward, groups and groups of other bugs coming in on the left and right side. Well, now I've got you trapped forward, left, and right. And you're up against your table edge. No deployment means I'm deploying from multiple areas. The other aspect of Tyranids at the time was the ability for certain units to land on the table, deep strike, spores landing and blowing up and releasing space bugs or tunneling up from the table, having those land immediately next to my opponent's army. So hitting them from multiple sides, looking for weaknesses to exploit, preventing essentially castling up or ways of working from that perspective, looking to see. Okay, let's jump forward now to looking at some ideas for null deployment for Battletech, utilizing this. Now, I'm going to be, certainly you could design it with just straight up mechs. I'm going to be talking combined arms because I love tanks. I love all of these elements. And these are the units. Again, this is just a template. You're going to look at your army. You're going to look at your system and pull this idea out. So if I build my tanks and my mechs in Battletech and I run across, walk across, fly across the table, I'm going to eat incoming shots. I'm going to eat long-range missiles. My opponent's going to keep on moving back. Maybe they're going to split their forces. They're going to look to outflank. The first thing I do is take 2 solid assault mechs. Build a lance, and this scales up or down based on battle value. I won't go Steiner Scout Lance and take 4 Atlases, but a solid, heavy lance. Could be T-Bolt, Marauder, Warhammer, something with a mix of long range and short range. That is going to be the initial deployment. That's going to go down based on the mission, and it's going to head towards the center of the table. It's going to head towards your grouping, primary grouping, and it's going to try and pin you, and it's going to try and encourage you to engage. Then I have a second element, because in traditional Battletech rules, you have to deploy on the table extremely hyper-fast units, warriors, extremely fast hovercraft, stuff that starts in the deployment zone, but literally turn 1, movement phase, I am anywhere pretty much on the left or right side of the table. That simulates this kind of classic null deployment of coming in on the left or right side of the wargaming table or the hex map. Something that's super, super fast. If you're playing with air support, Having them zip on and off the table can also work to that effect, but we're going to kind of leave dedicated fully air out for a moment. So units that can suddenly appear in those areas. Third element was infantry. Infantry loaded up in Karnovs. Turn 1, they're flying. Turn 2, they're landing, and we're getting out. So this idea that I've got a powerful heavy assault lance or lances advancing up the center of the table, encouraging you, I can't stop you, I can't fully control, but encouraging you to castle up, blast me away, dig in, utilize terrain. That's going to set you. Having warriors, fast-moving hovers up the left and the right. And it could be a mix. Couple of dozen Savannah Masters, backed by some warriors, backed by, just for the lulls, a Saladin in each group. That's for low battle value, autocannon shots, light autocannon shots, and lots of medium laser shots, and lots of initiative sinks. Those things move so fast, boom, turn 1, turn 2, they're at the side of the tables. Then they're going to move in left and right side to engage your opponent. And then the drop, what do you have that appears in the middle, would be infantry dropping in on Karnovs or something similar. Could also be done with not necessarily units, but artillery in BattleTech. Just could be some light artillery thumpers, could be some long toms, could be some off table. Just literally dropping random amounts of artillery in random areas that your opponent is in, and just trying to blast them on the spread, blast them on the scatter from that perspective. So this idea of null deployment, when you don't want to follow the traditional wargaming deployment of setting up, you set up, I move across the table, you've got volume of dice, and you're blasting me. How can you use your table edge to move forward? How can you utilize the left and the right table edge? And how can you immediately appear, or the simulated effect of suddenly dropping into the density of your opponent's army, coordinating all of these things to hit simultaneously or close to it. So turn 1, that your center element's moving up. Turn 1, side elements moving out, left table, right table. Third element moving into position. Turn 2, turn 3, everybody hitting from all sides, preventing your opponent from castling up, preventing your opponent refused flank, preventing your opponent from speed bumping, tar pitting, and really hitting them in all these different areas. Something to consider, something to play around. And from time to time, coming a long way from that Tyranid army, I still regularly look to adapt and use this concept of null deployment in my current wargaming systems and my current wargaming meta. So something to build and utilize in your wargaming toolkit.